I never realized how loud my life was until the moment it went silent. I've been teaching high school history for 12 years. 12 years of bells ringing, lockers slamming, teenagers shouting over each other, and the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that seems to vibrate through the walls of American public schools. I love my job, or at least, I tell myself I do. But lately I felt hollow, burned out. It's like I'm constantly pouring from an empty cup, running on caffeine and grading papers until my eyes blur. Then came Ramadan. To be honest, before this year, I didn't know much about it. I knew my Muslim students couldn't eat or drink. I'd see them in the cafeteria, sitting with their friends but not touching their trays, or sometimes heading to the library to avoid the smell of pizza and fries. I felt sorry for them. I thought, how exhausting. How can they focus? Why would they put themselves through that? I looked at their dry lips and tired eyes and saw only deprivation. I didn't see the strength. Not yet. It was a Tuesday. A rainy, gray Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon. The kind of day where the energy in the building is frantic. My last period class had been particularly difficult. Arguments, unfinished homework, the usual chaos. I was sitting at my desk after the bell rang, rubbing my temples, just trying to find a moment of peace before the faculty meeting. There was a knock on the door. It was Omar, a quiet boy who sits in the back row, and two other students, Sarah and Ahmed. They looked hesitant. In high school, teachers represent authority, rules, detention. They didn't know if I would understand. "Miss Thompson?" Omar asked softly. Can we ask you a huge favor?" I looked up, forcing a smile. "Sure, Omar. What is it? Did you forget a textbook?" "No." He shifted his weight, looking at the floor, then back at me. "It's time for Asr prayer. The library is full and the gym is being used for practice. We just need a clean place for 5 minutes. Just to pray. Would you mind if we used the corner of your classroom?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to help, but because of the rules. The separation of church and state. The administration. But then I looked at their faces. They weren't asking to skip class or cause trouble. They looked desperate, not for something they wanted, but for something they needed. Like air. "Okay," I said, my voice softer than usual. "Just close the door. I'll stay at my desk and grade papers." They smiled, genuine, relieved smiles that lit up their tired faces, and quickly moved the desks aside in the back corner. I watched them from behind my stack of essays. I expected them to just stand there and whisper. I didn't expect the transformation. Sarah took a small scarf from her backpack and covered her hair. The boys took off their sneakers. They lined up in rows, shoulder to shoulder, feet touching. There was no jostling, no giggling, no teenage awkwardness. Suddenly, they weren't high schoolers worrying about prom or exams. They were soldiers? No, not soldiers. Servants. They were servants standing before a king. The room went quiet, but it wasn't the empty silence of a detention hall. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, a silence that felt like it had weight. Then Omar, who usually barely speaks above a whisper in class, raised his hands to his ears. "Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest." He didn't shout it. He spoke it with a softness that tore through the noise in my head. And then they began to move, in unison, bowing, standing, and then going down to the floor. I stopped grading. My red pen hovered over the paper, forgotten. I swiveled my chair silently to watch. I have seen students do many things in this classroom. I've seen them cheat, fight, cry over breakups, and sleep. But I have never, in 12 years, seen them submit. To see Ahmed, the captain of the soccer team, a boy who walks with a swagger that says he owns the world, put his forehead on the dirty tile floor of a public high school. It did something to me. He was lowering himself. He was making himself the lowest he could possibly be. And yet, in that moment, he looked more dignified than I had ever seen him. The only sound in the room was the rustling of their clothes and the soft, rhythmic breathing of their recitation. Subhana Rabbiyal Allah, glory to my Lord, the Most High. They were hungry. They were thirsty. They had been in school for 7 hours. But they weren't rushing. They were paused in time. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were closed as she stood back up, her hands folded over her chest. There was a look of such intense peace on her face, a tranquility that I realized, with a sudden pang of jealousy, I had never felt in my entire life. I am 40 years old. I have a house, a car, a career. I have everything I'm supposed to want. But watching these 17-year-olds, I felt like a pauper watching a king eat a feast. Why did I feel so empty? I looked around my classroom. The posters on the walls about the Civil War and the Great Depression, the piles of ungraded work, the coffee cup stains. It all seemed so trivial, so temporary. They were connecting to something eternal right here, next to the pencil sharpener and the whiteboard. My throat tightened. A lump formed that I couldn't swallow away. I thought about my own life. When was the last time I bowed to anything? When was the last time I stopped the chaos of my day to just be grateful? To acknowledge something bigger than myself? I rushed from one task to another, constantly chasing, constantly stressed. And here were these kids, in the middle of a fast, finding a sanctuary that I couldn't see. They went down into prostration again. Sujood. I didn't know the word then, but I know it now. The position of total surrender, and that's when the tears started. I couldn't stop them. They were hot and fast, tracking through the makeup on my cheeks. I wasn't sad. I was overwhelmed. I was witnessing an intimacy between the created and the creator that felt too sacred for me to even be watching. It felt like the air in the room had changed, like the molecules were vibrating at a different frequency. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a sob. I felt like an intruder, yet I couldn't look away. I saw the soles of their socks, worn and simple. I saw their vulnerability. In a world that tells these kids to be tough, to be cool, to be independent, they were choosing to be dependent on God. They sat up, turning their heads to the right, then to the left. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you and God's mercy. The prayer was over. The thick, heavy silence lifted, replaced by a lighter, softer air. They didn't jump up immediately. They sat for a moment, moving their lips in silent personal prayers. Omar rubbed his face with his hands as if washing himself with light. When they finally stood up and began to move the desks back, I quickly wiped my face with a tissue, pretending to blow my nose. I turned back to my desk, my heart pounding in my chest like I had just run a marathon. "Thank you, Miss Thompson," Sarah said as they picked up their bags. Her voice was cheerful, normal again. "We really appreciate it." I turned around. I wanted to say, "You're welcome." I wanted to be the cool, detached teacher, but I couldn't. My voice cracked. "You're welcome," I whispered. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked, How do you do it? Aren't you hungry?" Ahmed paused at the door, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He smiled, and it wasn't the cocky smile of the soccer captain. It was a soft, humble smile. "We are, Ms. Thompson," he said gently. "My stomach is empty, but—" He tapped his chest, right over his heart. "This is full. The prayer feeds the soul even if the body is hungry." They left the room, disappearing into the noisy hallway, back into the world of lockers and bells. I sat there alone in the empty classroom for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of floor wax and old books filled the air. But something was different. The corner where they prayed felt different. I looked at my hand, trembling slightly. I realized that for 8 minutes, while they prayed, I hadn't thought about my grading. I hadn't worried about my bills. I hadn't felt the crushing weight of my anxiety. Their peace had bled into me. I am not a Muslim. I grew up in a secular home. But that day, in a public high school classroom, watching 3 teenagers bow their heads to the floor, I learned something that no textbook could ever teach me. I learned that we are more than just bodies needing food and sleep. We are souls needing connection. I still teach history, but now when Ramadan comes, I don't look at my students with pity anymore. I look at them with awe. And sometimes, when the classroom is empty and the noise of the day fades away, I look at that back corner and I remember the silence. And I find myself hoping, praying, that one day I might find a peace as loud as theirs.